off the beaten track, Botanical takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.
Hello and welcome to Prague off the beaten track. I've already visited one of Prague's botanical gardens before, the one in Malešice, which belongs to a secondary school specializing in gardening and horticulture. But there are actually 3 botanical gardens in the Czech capital, as I think I mentioned in that episode, and each of them has a different story and operator. So let me restate that the biggest and arguably best known is the one in Troja, run by the city of Prague itself, a popular weekend destination with greenhouses, outdoor exhibitions and fine views across the Vltava Valley. And I might visit that one another time. But today I'm heading somewhere smaller, older, and I think much more academic, to Naslupy Street in Prague's Albertov district. This is where you will find the Botanical Garden of Charles University, managed by the Faculty of Sciences. It's the oldest continuously operating botanical garden in Czechia, dating back to the 18th century. While it may not be as large as the Troja Garden, it has its own quiet charm. Part university facility, part public oasis, tucked between historic buildings and the tram tracks leading down from the center of the city to Nusle Valley. From what I just said about the tram tracks leading down to Nusle Valley, you can probably tell that this place is really close to the city center. In fact, you can easily walk here from Wenceslav Square, as I did just now. All you need is to head down Vodičkova Street or any other of the parallel streets in that direction, cross Charles Square with its leafy park and statues, and then continue along Vyšehradská Street, and after just a few minutes, when Naslupy Street branches off toward Nusle, you'll find one of the garden's entrances, and suddenly you step away from the noise of trams and traffic into a surprisingly calm and green world. The story of Prague's University Botanical Garden goes back to the reign of Empress Maria Theresa. The very first one was founded in 1775 on the left bank of the Vltava in Smíchov. For the first time, students of medicine and botany had a proper place to study plants, instead of collecting specimens in private gardens or during field trips. At that time, the university in Prague was known as the Charles Ferdinand University, named after Emperor Ferdinand III. But in the second half of the 19th century, Prague and the whole of Bohemia was changing fast. The Czech national revival was gaining strength and the demand grew for higher education in the Czech language. Until then, German had been the main language of teaching at the university. In 1882, the emperor finally approved the division of the university into 2 completely separate institutions, one Czech and one German. Well, why am I mentioning that? Because from that moment on, even this botanical garden here in Albertov was affected. It was supposed to be shared between both universities, but that soon turned out to be unrealistic, or at least problematic. The German director and professor of botany, A. Moritz Wilkom, took the matter personally, and he feared, obviously, losing privileges and argued that if the observatory and other university institutions remained exclusively German, then so should the garden. His Czech counterparts, or one would feel like saying opponents rather, of course disagreed. The stalemate lasted until a new German professor, Richard Wettstein, arrived in Prague and brought a more conciliatory tone. He eventually supported the idea of creating 2 separate gardens, one for each university. And that decision couldn't have come at a better time, because the old Smíchov garden was already in a very bad shape, surrounded by growing industry and threatened especially by frequent floods, and far from the main university buildings on the right-hand side of the river. Even teaching there became almost impossible. The classrooms were freezing cold in winter, barely reaching 6 degrees in the morning, and the furnaces smoked so badly that students often stayed away altogether. It took finally a devastating flood in 1891 to prove once and for all that the location of the old botanical garden in Smíchov was unsuitable. Soon after, thanks to the cooperation of Wettstein and the Czech botanist Ladislav Čelakovský, the universities agreed to build 2 brand new botanical gardens on the slopes on Naslupy, right here where I'm standing today. So by the end of the 19th century, the university botanical garden, or rather gardens, were moved from Smíchov to a new location on this place, thanks to the efforts of several professors who had long pushed for better conditions for teaching and research. The site itself had actually once been a derelict place of land bought by the local society for the improvement of horticulture, which had already built a large greenhouse and held regular plant exhibitions here. The existing infrastructure made it a natural choice for a new university gardens. The upper part of the grounds, closer to the German Natural Science Institutes, went to the German university, while the lower section, where I'm standing right now, was assigned to the Czech one. A simple wire fence separated the two, though from the outside it still looked like one continuous garden. The new institute buildings and greenhouses were built, and the new botanical garden or gardens officially opened in the autumn of 1898. So the move finally gave both universities proper facilities for teaching and scientific work, ending years of improvised arrangements scattered across Prague. Still, cooperation between the two gardens wasn't always easy. Rivalries and small disputes were fairly common, and one of the Czech directors was even said or known for his rather eccentric behavior, like crossing over the fence separating the two gardens, to quote it, to borrow a rare plant or two. I mean, some people might say that he was basically stealing from the Germans. Despite such episodes, the Czech garden gradually developed its own identity, including a section devoted to local Bohemian flora. Over the following decades, there were repeated debates about expanding or even relocating the garden, but none of them ever came to life. Eventually, during the Second World War, both gardens were merged after the Czech universities were closed under the Nazis, and the entire complex was taken over by the German university, marking one of the, I think, quite darker chapters in its long history. But it needs to be said that during the Second World War, the Czech part of the Botanical Institute became an important center of resistance. The respected geobotanist Vladimír Krajina, of whom you can read, if you can read in Czech mainly, operated here as one of the leading figures of the non-communist underground movement, using the buildings in Benátská Street, which now actually borders the Botanical Garden, as his main headquarters. And it was from here that he sent coded radio messages to Britain under the name Sparta I. And his wartime efforts were later praised even by Winston Churchill. The final months of the war, it needs to be mentioned as well, brought tragedy, a real tragedy, because on the 14th of February 1945, Prague was heavily bombed, as I already mentioned in some of the previous podcasts, especially the one about Vítoň, which is really close to this botanical garden. The garden's original German greenhouses were completely destroyed by the bombing, and the director of the German Institute died with his wife under unclear circumstances during the May uprising of 1945. After the Nazis left and Czechoslovakia was liberated, the German university was abolished, and the dividing fence between the Czech and German gardens was finally torn down, and the entire complex became part of a newly unified Charles University, the institution as we know it today. Why did I spend so much time telling you about the history of this place? Well, I think it's a very nice kind of illustration of the very complex relationships that I think marked the life of many, even today, I would say venerable institutions in Prague at the second half of the 19th and the first half of the 20th century. And I just really think that it needs to be mentioned. Be it as it may, now in the third decade of the 21st century, the Botanical Garden of Charles University covers about 3.5 hectares, combining a compact outdoor park with several historic greenhouses. Now, you cannot come here and expect something like Kew Gardens in London. I mean, this place is definitely much, much smaller, but it needs to be said, it's much closer to the center, I would like to stress again. So you don't have to travel a long way like you do from the center of London to get to Kew Gardens. Here, you can just kind of pop in during any day of the week. The outdoor section of the Botanical Garden is laid out in kind of terraces, climbing the gentle slope between Naslupy Street and Viničná. And it feels almost like a green, I would say, amphitheater surrounded by city life. Visitors can walk through different plant zones. You can read something about the plants here from a section dedicated to Central European flora and limestone rock garden with a small stream and pond, to displays of wetland and alpine vegetation. There's also a collection of trees and shrubs, including some real rarities. For example, more than a century and a half old ginkgo bonsai nicknamed Praga, one of the first dawn redwoods ever planted in Europe, as I read, and several Mediterranean Carpathian species. There are some more exotic species that can, live outside, that can grow outside, even here in Prague. And I would like to stress also that the outdoor garden is open to the public. And as I'm walking around on this beautiful autumn day, it seems to be quite popular, especially with students. And they seem to be enjoying the calm, leafy atmosphere. Now I've just stepped inside the greenhouse complex. It needs to be said there's an entrance fee of some 100 crowns. And if you are willing to pay that, it definitely gives you access to a completely different world. You can probably hear the parrots that are in some cages here, probably to add to the atmosphere of kind of tropical climate. And as far as I'm concerned, the entrance fee is definitely worth it. The air here is warm and humid, and you're immediately surrounded by, the sound of birds that I mentioned. And around me are palms, kind of ferns, I think, and some plants with enormous leaves glistening with condensation. It's much warmer than outside, and for a moment it feels as if I've traded autumn Prague for a rainforest somewhere far away. One of the highlights here is the permanent exhibition of succulents and cacti. It's set in one of the upper greenhouses, bright, dry and full of strange shapes and spiky silhouettes that looked as if they came from another planet. Some of them are even flowering now, which adds a splash of color to the desert palette. You can easily lose track of time here, just walking among the stones and sand, surrounded by plants from Africa and the Americas. Now, as I'm recording this episode, the Botanical Garden of the Faculty of Sciences of Charles University is actually marking a special milestone, 250 years since its founding. And to celebrate, there's a steady stream of events throughout this autumn or fall, from the Botanical Exchange for plant lovers to exhibitions of orchids, citrus trees, bonsai, exotic birds, and even a concert in the garden's quiet refugium, as they call it. There really seems to be something going on here all the time, whether you come to study, relax, or just enjoy the simple pleasure of being among plants in the very heart of Prague. So, that's all for this episode of Prague off the Beaten Track. The botanical trail is complete, from the garden's fascinating history to its peaceful present. As always, you can find more information and photographs on the Prague of the Beaten Track page at Radio Prague International's website, along with a fact box and some practical tips on how to get here if you'd like to visit yourself.
Prague off the Beaten Track. Vít Bochanka takes you away from the crowds to the city's hidden gems.